Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? Sergeant First Class Maya had learned to stop asking that question years ago. At 44, she carried the weight of 2 wars on her back, and yet here on the grounds of Fort, she was just the old dog trainer. Her dark hair, tied in the same practical bun she had worn for over a decade, gleamed faintly under the sterile lights of the training compound. Her uniform bore the quiet wear of a soldier who had lived in kennels more than offices, in dirt more than ceremony. She walked the morning grounds like a ghost that refused to fade. The younger handlers jogged past her, German shepherds and Belgian tethered by slick GPS harnesses that glowed faintly in the pre-dawn mist. Their breath turned white in the cool air, paws hammering against concrete in steady rhythm. They carried digital tablets, thermal scopes, mapping systems. They carried the future, or at least that's what they believed. And when they passed her, they nodded politely, respectful on the surface. But after a few steps, whispers drifted back. She's still doing it the old way. Doesn't she realize we've moved past whistles and leashes? She's stuck in the 90s, man. Maya didn't answer. She never did. The silence had become her shield, her quiet way of letting their words dissolve into the morning fog. What they didn't know, what they could never guess, was that she carried something inked into her skin, hidden beneath the fabric of her uniform. A tattoo so faded it was almost invisible, and yet it was the one mark of truth she had never erased. A secret unit, 47 missions, 0 casualties. But that story wasn't for them, not yet. Her hand brushed unconsciously against the scar on her right palm, pale and jagged. A souvenir from Afghanistan, 2011. An explosion, classified. The kind of mission that never made it into official records. The kind where you either came back alive or you didn't come back at all. Her left knee tightened as she crouched, the remnants of surgery whispering pain that technology could never quite erase. Every scar had a story, but nobody here asked and Maya never told. She walked toward Kennel 7. That's where Phantom waited. The German shepherd rose slowly as she approached, his muzzle flecked with gray, his eyes still hard with the sharp intelligence of a soldier who had seen too much. 9 years old, considered too old by the veterinarian, considered useless by the young handlers. Dr. Harrison had recommended retirement just weeks ago. He's stubborn, slow to adapt, struggles with new systems, the doctor had said. But Maya didn't see an old dog. She saw a partner who had stood by her through nights that broke other people, a tracker with instincts technology couldn't measure, a survivor. She opened the gate, clipped the leash, and whispered the same 2 words she always did. We work. Phantom's ears twitched, his body stiffening with discipline born from years of trust. Old dog, maybe. But to Maya, he was the last link to a world where survival didn't depend on blinking screens. A few yards away, Sergeant laughed as he adjusted the sleek harness on his Rex. 23 years old, brimming with confidence, his dog wired with GPS and thermal systems. Sergeant Park, 25, Korean-American with a sharp eye for drone mapping, stood beside him. Together they represented the new face of search and rescue. Fast, precise, technology-driven. They looked at Maya as if she belonged to another century. Smirked, his voice carrying just enough to reach her. Still working with that antique. Phantom can barely walk straight, ma'am. My Rex here, 3 years old, peak condition, integrated with the best tracking systems. That's the future. Park chuckled. Old school trainer, old school dog. Might as well train with compasses and smoke signals. Their laughter stung, but Maya didn't flinch. She adjusted Phantom's collar, knelt to his level and looked into his eyes. Eyes that had seen gunfire light up valleys. Eyes that had watched over wounded soldiers in the blackest nights. Eyes that didn't care about being mocked. Have you ever been dismissed because you didn't fit the mold? Because your ways weren't shiny enough, new enough, fast enough? That's where Maya lived every single day. And still, she showed up. The compound buzzed with activity until 10:30 a.m., when the voice of Major Stevens cut through the chatter. All personnel to the conference room. Now. The handlers exchanged looks, their casual mourning replaced with stiff professionalism. Maya clipped Phantom's leash to the rack, whispered "stay," and followed. Inside the conference room, Stephen stood grim, his hands tight against the table. Lines carved his face deeper than usual, and his voice trembled under the weight of something heavier than routine. "Specialist Jackson is missing," he said flatly. "Last contact at 23:30 hours. Highland Ridge. No signal since. Terrain, cliffs, dense forest, unpredictable weather. 3 search teams already deployed, drones, thermal GPS. 18 hours, no results." A silence thickened the air. Missing in Highland Ridge. That place was notorious. Jagged cliffs, magnetic interference, storms that rolled in without warning. A place that didn't forgive mistakes. Was the first to speak, his confidence unshaken. "Sir, my dog Rex is with the most advanced systems available. We'll cover ground faster than traditional methods." Stevens shook his head. "Drones grounded by winds, thermal blocked by tree cover, GPS jammed by terrain interference. We've burned through everything we had." Maya said nothing, but her mind was already moving. She knew Highland Ridge. She had trained Phantom there years ago, long before ever held a leash. She remembered the scent patterns, the way water streams twisted through rock, the animal trails, the way wind carried stories across the ridge. Stories only a trained nose could read. But she stayed silent. No one wanted to hear from the old trainer, not until someone asked. When the meeting ended and Park strapped on their gear, confident, unshaken, Maya approached, her voice quiet but steady. "I'd like to join the mission." Turned, surprised. "With Phantom, ma'am, no offense, but this job needs speed, modern systems. Phantom isn't field ready anymore." His eyes flicked to the shepherd waiting outside the conference room. "You just slow us down." Maya's lips curved into the faintest smile. Not amused, just patient. "Phantom has 7 years' experience on Highland Ridge. He's worked terrain your equipment can't read. If you think experience deserves a place alongside technology, then you know where to find me." Exchanged a look with Park, smirking, certain she'd be proven wrong. 2 hours later, a helicopter thundered over the ridge, carrying them into the heart of Highland. Its equipment blinked with artificial certainty. Maya's hand rested on Phantom's head, her heart steady in the storm of doubt. Called over the roar, "We'll do grid pattern search. GPS thermal drone in reserve, fast, efficient." Maya crouched beside Phantom, whispering rituals only they understood. Water, a hand over his ears, a slow press against his chest, a language of trust forged in missions no one could speak of. Phantom locked his eyes onto hers. Ready. They split directions, with his tech, Maya with the dog everyone dismissed. An hour passed. Radio crackled with frustration. GPS false signals, thermal ineffective, drone down, repeat, drone down. Maya listened in silence. Phantom moved through the ridge, nose brushing ground, ears pricked. Then suddenly his posture shifted, nose locked, tail straight, muscles alive with focus. Maya recognized it instantly, scent trail. She clicked the radio. "Base, this is, Phantom has a lead. Grid 245.7, proceeding on trail." Static, then's voice sharp with disbelief. "Negative, that sector's been scanned twice. Thermal clear, nothing there." Maya didn't answer him. She trusted Phantom, trusted the old ways. She pressed forward. 45 minutes later, the world changed. Beneath dense brush, nearly invisible to aerial scans, a soldier lay shivering. Specialist Jackson, semi-conscious, dehydrated, but alive. Maya pressed her radio, her voice calm, steady, cutting through disbelief. "Base, this is, Jackson located, alive, immediate medevac required, Phantom tracked where technology failed." And in that moment, the old dog and the old trainer had rewritten the story. Have you ever seen experience triumph over technology? That day, everyone at Fort did. And it was only the beginning. How could a half-faded tattoo change everything? Colonel David Hawthorne hadn't expected to notice it at all. Not in that dim evening light, not in the rush of post-mission chaos. But once he saw it, ink barely visible under her sleeve, it felt like a ghost had stepped out of classified history and stood breathing right in front of him. Hours earlier, Specialist Jackson had been flown out on a medevac, still alive, still breathing. The entire compound had exhaled as if one man's survival meant they had all been given permission to hope again. Yet the buzz around the base wasn't about Jackson's survival. It was about how it had happened. Maya and her 9-year-old dog had outperformed the most advanced military equipment the base possessed. She hadn't argued her way into glory. She hadn't boasted, hadn't pointed fingers. She had simply done what she always did. Followed phantom, followed instinct, trusted the invisible patterns of earth, air, and scent. Couldn't hide his disbelief. Neither could Park. Their gear had failed. Their systems had collapsed. And the old trainer, mocked just that morning, had carried Jackson home. That night, as the compound lights flickered against the wire fences, found himself standing awkwardly outside Kennel 7. Maya was inside, brushing Phantom's coat with quiet care. The shepherd's chest rose and fell with the deep, steady rhythm of earned rest. Cleared his throat. He looked younger than he had that morning, his confidence stripped raw, his pride replaced with something quieter, humbler. "Sergeant," he said finally, "I owe you an apology." Maya didn't turn right away. Her brush moved in slow circles, steady, unhurried. Only after a long pause did she glance over her shoulder, her eyes unreadable. "For what?" she asked. "For underestimating you, for underestimating him." His hand gestured faintly toward Phantom, who lifted his head just enough to acknowledge the voice, then settled back down. I thought technology had all the answers, but today," he trailed off, words failing where humility began. Maya set the brush aside, stood, and faced him. Her voice was gentle, not triumphant. "Technology is powerful, but power doesn't always mean wisdom. You learn that when you've stood in places where no equipment could save you." Nodded. "I get that now." Silence hung between them. Awkward, heavy, necessary. Finally, he added, "Thank you for saving him, for proving me wrong." Maya gave the smallest of smiles. Not victory, just acknowledgement. "It wasn't about proving you wrong. It was about bringing him home." And with that, she turned back to Phantom, brushing his fur as if the conversation were already over. Because to her, it was. The next morning, Colonel Hawthorne summoned her. At 52, Hawthorne carried authority without theatrics. Years in Afghanistan and Iraq had carved lines of steel into his face. He wasn't easily impressed. And yet, he greeted Maya not with command but with something rare in his voice: respect. "Sergeant," he began, packing slowly in his office, "what you and Phantom accomplished yesterday, that wasn't just luck. That was mastery. Life was saved because you trusted methods the rest of us had dismissed." Maya stood at attention, her posture rigid, her voice calm. "Sir, we did what needed to be done." Hawthorne studied her, eyes narrowing, searching. He had seen soldiers speak those words before, the ones who carried weight they couldn't share, the ones who had walked in shadows. And then he saw it. As Maya shifted, her sleeve tugged slightly, revealing the faintest outline of ink on her upper shoulder. It wasn't clear, not in the half-light, but it was enough. Hawthorne's gaze locked, his breath caught, and for the briefest moment the mask of command cracked. That tattoo, that shape, that insignia. A dog silhouette, a shadowed moon, the letters SD. It couldn't be, it shouldn't be. That unit never officially existed, not on paper, not in history books, but Hawthorne had read whispers in classified briefings years ago. He knew what those marks meant. His voice dropped, almost reverent. "Where did you get that?" Maya froze. Instinct told her to adjust her sleeve, hide it again, but it was too late. He'd seen. And Hawthorne wasn't a man who missed details. "Sir," she said slowly, her tone sharpening, "that's not relevant to my duty here." Hawthorne stepped closer, his eyes fierce, his voice low. "Shadow trackers, isn't it?" The room thickened with silence. Maya's jaw tightened, her pulse quickened. She had spent years guarding that truth, carrying it in silence, never allowing it to slip. The shadow trackers had been erased from records. No medals, not even a line in official history. They were a ghost unit, a name only whispered in hidden corners of the military world. But Hawthorne knew, and now so did she. "Sir," Maya finally said, her voice carrying both defiance and exhaustion, "some things were never meant to be spoken." Hawthorne held her gaze. Respect deepened into something heavier, recognition. 47 missions, 0 casualties. His voice carried awe, almost disbelief. "I thought the stories were myths, and yet here you are, standing in my office." Maya said nothing. Her silence was its own admission. For the first time in years, someone had called out what she had hidden, not as mockery, not as suspicion, but as truth. Hawthorne exhaled slowly, leaning back. "Sergeant, you are not what you seem to this base, and if I have anything to say about it, that changes now." Outside his office, the handlers carried on with their usual chatter, unaware that inside, an old tattoo had just shifted the weight of history. That night Maya sat alone in her quarters. Phantom lay at her feet, snoring softly, his body curled against the cold. She stared at the small mirror above the sink, pulled her sleeve down, looked at the ink she had hidden for years. It was barely there now, faded, worn by time, almost erased. But still it carried weight. A mark of lives saved, of nights endured, of secrets kept. A mark she had sworn never to explain. And now someone had seen it, someone who understood. She leaned against the wall, her chest tight, her throat dry. Part of her wanted to breathe easier, finally, recognition after years of silence. But another part ached with unease, because recognition meant exposure, and exposure meant vulnerability. For 12 years at Fort, she had endured whispers, dismissals, mockery. That was easier than the alternative, easier than carrying the truth in the open. She stroked Phantom's head gently, whispering into the quiet. "We weren't supposed to be remembered, old man. We weren't supposed to be found." Phantom stirred, his tail brushing the floor once before he fell back asleep. But Maya couldn't sleep, not that night. Because sometimes the past doesn't stay buried. Sometimes a faded tattoo is louder than any voice. And the base had just heard it. Why were the whispers different now? Maya had lived with whispers for 12 years. Snide remarks about her methods, quiet laughter about her age, side glances at Phantom's graying muzzle. Those whispers were predictable, safe. She could wear them like armor. But the whispers that filled the halls after Jackson's rescue carried a new weight. Curiosity, unease, even awe. She found him when tech couldn't. Phantom did what drones and satellites couldn't touch. "Did you see the commander call her in? He never does that for trainers." By the third day, the tone had shifted again. Quieter, more secretive, carried in corners, traded between handlers like contraband. "Shadow trackers. I heard it's a ghost unit, doesn't even exist. Someone said she was part of it, 40-something missions, all successful, 0 losses." The more they didn't know, the more they speculated. Rumor had become wildfire, and Maya's silence was the oxygen feeding it. She kept her routine. Morning kennel rounds, old whistle checks, water bowls filled. Phantom walked the compound like nothing had changed. But Maya could feel the shift. Eyes lingered longer. Conversations stopped when she entered a room. Respect replaced mockery, but it wasn't the kind she wanted. Respect without understanding could feel just as heavy as ridicule. Caught her near the kennels one afternoon. He stood then before, his tone clipped but softened. "Ma'am, Sergeant, people are saying things about you, about some unit, shadow something." Maya froze. She didn't look at him right away. Instead, she adjusted Phantom's collar, her hands steady. "People say a lot of things." "But is it true?" His voice lowered, almost pleading. Were you part of that? Did you really? He trailed off, unable to finish the question. Maya turned then, her eyes meeting his. For the first time since they'd met, he saw the weight behind them, not just discipline, but a history carved into scars and silence. Truth, she said quietly, is not something you should want to carry lightly. Blinked, unsure what to say. He opened his mouth, closed it, then finally muttered, "Yes, ma'am." He walked away. The whispers grew louder in his absence. That evening, Colonel Hawthorne sat alone in his office, a single lamp casting yellow light over a desk buried in reports. His hand hovered over the phone, tempted to make a call that could change everything. He had recognized the tattoo. He had spoken the words aloud, and now he wrestled with what to do next. The shadow trackers. He had been a major when he first read about them in fragments in half-erased briefings that seemed more myth than fact. Elite trackers operating in Afghanistan 2008 to 2012. No official records, no public recognition. A unit that lived and died in silence, except they didn't die. They brought people home, every single time. If what he'd seen on Maya's shoulder was real, then one of the last surviving trackers was standing in his command. And she had just proved, in the most undeniable way, that her knowledge could save lives where modern technology failed. But acknowledging her meant opening a door the military had closed for a reason. Classified units stayed classified. Legends stayed buried. The moment he spoke the truth aloud, it wouldn't just be about Maya, it would ripple outward. Command would question him. The Pentagon might intervene. And Maya, who had lived quietly for years, would be dragged back into light she clearly hadn't asked for. Hawthorne leaned back, rubbing his temple. He respected her silence. He respected the way she hadn't demanded recognition, hadn't even hinted at her past. She had let herself be underestimated, mocked, ignored, all to keep the secret intact. But he couldn't ignore what he'd seen in the ridge. If Phantom hadn't been there, Jackson would have died. Technology had failed. Her methods hadn't. And that wasn't something he could file away as coincidence. He closed his eyes. The decision weighed heavy: protect her secret or bring her past into the light. Meanwhile, Maya sat in her quarters, her reflection staring back at her from the darkened window. Phantom rested at her side, ears twitching in sleep. She traced the tattoo with her fingers. The ink was fading, yes, but the memories weren't. They burned sharp as ever. The faces of soldiers she had found. The nights she had walked into black valleys with nothing but a dog and a whistle, praying the trail led to life, not death. She remembered the last mission, the silence afterward, the command that had told her and her unit, "You were never there," the medal that had never been pinned, the debriefing that had never been written. And then nothing. She had been moved to Fort, a quiet assignment, a kennel trainer. It was supposed to be simple, safe, a way to fade. But the ridge had changed that. Phantom had changed that. One successful rescue, and now the shadows stirred again. She whispered to Phantom, her voice rough, "They're starting to see, and I don't know if that's a blessing or a curse." The shepherd's tail flicked once, as if he understood. 2 days later, Major Stevens called a full assembly. Every handler, every officer, even the base veterinarian. The atmosphere was taut, charged. Stevens spoke formally, his voice echoing in the room. 2 nights ago, Sergeant and Phantom achieved what our most advanced systems could not. They located Specialist Jackson in impossible terrain and returned him alive. That fact demands recognition. Applause rose, hesitant at first, then steady. Maya stood in the back, rigid, her eyes fixed on the floor. Phantom sat beside her, unmoved. Then Stevens gestured toward the front. "Sergeant, step forward." Maya froze. Slowly, deliberately, she walked to the front. The handlers who once mocked her now looked at her with something different, respect, maybe even shame, and Park shifted uncomfortably in the crowd. Stevens continued. "Sergeant's methods may seem old-fashioned, but they represent knowledge we can no longer ignore. The base commander has recommended a review of her techniques for possible integration into our official protocols. Maya's chest tightened. Integration, review, those words meant exposure. Her stomach twisted. Hawthorne rose then, his voice carrying deeper than Stephen's. Let me be clear. Sargent is not merely an old trainer. She is one of the most experienced specialists in military tracking I have ever seen. You will treat her with the respect she has earned. The room shifted. Whispers again, this time sharper, stronger. Shadow trackers, someone mouthed near the back. Maya caught it out of the corner of her eye. Her throat went dry. The secret was leaking faster than she could contain it. After the assembly, she walked quickly toward the kennels, Phantom at her side, but intercepted her again, his voice low, urgent. Ma'am, please, just tell me. Was it you? Was it really shadow trackers? Maya stopped. She looked at him, and in that moment she felt torn in two. Part of her wanted to snap. Stop asking. You don't know what you're talking about. Another part wanted to unburden herself, to finally say aloud what she had carried in silence. Instead, she said nothing, just walked past him. Because sometimes silence was the only shield she had left. That night Maya sat awake again, listening to the wind rattle against her window. The base was changing around her. Rumors, respect, recognition. The past was no longer content to stay buried. And somewhere deep inside her, a question gnawed. When the truth finally came out, because it always did, would it free her, or destroy her? How long can you hide from a truth that refuses to stay buried? Maya had asked herself that question 1,000 times, but never louder than now. Every corner of the base seemed to hum with it. Every glance carried it. Every whisper felt like a spotlight tearing through the shadows she had lived under for years. The secret had once been her shield. Now it felt like a countdown. It was Colonel Hawthorne who finally forced her hand. He called her to his office late one evening. No formal assembly this time. No audience. Just him, a desk, and a manila folder that looked too thin to carry what it carried. He gestured for her to sit. Maya remained standing. "Sir," she said evenly, "with respect, if this is about Jackson, the matter's closed." Hawthorne studied her quietly. Then he opened the folder. Inside were copies of reports that technically didn't exist, heavily redacted, black lines cutting through paragraphs until only fragments remained. He slid one page across the desk. Shadow Trackers, Operation Dusk Haven, Afghanistan 2009. His eyes locked on hers. "I know it was you, you and Phantom, or rather Phantom's predecessor." Maya's throat tightened. The room seemed smaller, the air heavier. She stared at the page but didn't touch it. "Sir, those records are classified." "Yes," Hawthorne said softly, "classified to everyone but me. And now to you and me both sitting in this room. I don't need every detail, but I need to know why you've hidden it, and why you've allowed yourself to be dismissed as an old trainer when you're something far greater." Maya finally sat, slowly, stiffly, her hands pressed against her knees as though she were bracing herself against an unseen storm. "Because," she said quietly, "we weren't supposed to exist. That's the whole point of the trackers. We went where others could, found who others couldn't, but no one could ever know." Her voice faltered just for a breath, then steadied. 47 missions, every one successful. Soldiers pulled out of valleys before the enemy could find them. Civilians pulled out of collapsed buildings before erased their names. Every time we returned. No one left behind. No one lost, but we were never there. No official recognition. No medals, no history. She exhaled slowly, eyes lowering to the floor. The tattoo was the only proof we carried, and even that we were told to keep hidden. Hawthorne leaned forward, "And yet you still carry it." Maya's hand moved unconsciously toward her shoulder, where the ink slept beneath her sleeve. "Because I can't erase the lives it represents." Silence stretched. Phantom shifted at her feet, letting out a low sigh. Finally Hawthorne spoke. "Tell me about one." Her eyes flicked up. "Sir. Tell me about one mission, just one. I need to understand." For a long moment, Maya said nothing. Then she nodded slowly, as though the dam inside her had cracked. Her voice grew softer, almost like a voiceover echoing through memory. "There was a boy," she began. 16, an Afghan interpreter. His convoy was ambushed in the mountains. We were tasked to find him before the enemy did. GPS was useless terrain interference. Drones grounded, technology blinded. All we had was Phantom's nose. Hours we tracked through dust and blood, through trails the enemy thought they had erased. Phantom locked onto his scent by a thread. And there he was, hiding in a crevice, trembling, waiting for death. Her voice broke just slightly. "We brought him out, alive. He held my hand the whole helicopter ride back. He never let go. And when we landed, he cried into Phantom's fur until he fell asleep. That was Operation Dusk Haven. Officially, it never happened." Hawthorne sat back, his chest heavy with the weight of her words. Maya swallowed hard. "That's why I've stayed silent, because the truth is heavier than the lie, and because sometimes silence is the only way to protect what matters." Hawthorne nodded slowly. His respect for her deepened into reverence. "Sergeant, you've carried this long enough, but the world we're in now, our soldiers, our handlers need what you know. Technology alone isn't enough. Yesterday proved that. If you don't share this, if you stay silent, others will die when they didn't have to." Maya closed her eyes. The weight of his words pressed against her chest. He was right, but breaking silence meant betraying the oath she had carried for over a decade. When she opened them again, her eyes glistened. "Sir, you don't understand. Carrying the truth isn't noble. It's a burden. It means living with the ghosts of people you can't name, missions you can't acknowledge. You think recognition feels good. It doesn't. It feels like reopening wounds you've spent years trying to stitch shut." Hawthorne's voice softened. "Maybe, but silence isn't healing you either. Look around. Your silence has made you invisible. And yet when Phantom found Jackson, the silence shattered anyway. The truth is already bleeding into the light. The choice now is whether you'll guide it or let rumors define you." Maya stared at him, her breath uneven. For the first time, she didn't feel like a forgotten trainer. She felt like a soldier standing at a cliff edge, one step away from exposing the shadows she had lived in. Later that night, she sat with Phantom outside the kennels. The compound lights flickered, the wind carried the scent of pine and distant rain. She whispered into the darkness. "Do you remember, old man, those nights in the mountains, those trails that no map could mark? You were the only one I trusted to get us out, and you did, every time." Phantom leaned into her side, his muzzle gray, his body warm against hers. She stroked his fur slowly. "They want me to tell it, to bring it out, but once it's out, it won't belong to us anymore. It'll belong to them, to everyone." Her voice dropped, almost trembling, "And I don't know if I can let go like that." But deep inside, she knew the tide was shifting. She couldn't hold it back forever. The whispers were growing, the commander was watching, the young handlers were waiting, the shadows were thinning. And sooner or later, the truth would walk in daylight. Why did teaching feel harder than surviving? Maya asked herself that as she stood before a semicircle of handlers, each one younger, sharper, hungrier than she had ever been. The training grounds were alive with restless energy, boots shuffling on gravel, dogs pulling at their leashes, impatient hands gripping tablet screens they had been told to leave behind. Behind her, Phantom sat like a sentinel, ears pricked, eyes hard, his presence heavier than any lecture. Colonel Hawthorne had made the announcement just 3 days earlier. A pilot program in Shadow Tracker, methods would begin at Fort. Maya would serve as lead instructor. The handlers hadn't known whether to cheer or groan. Some, had nodded with quiet respect, still carrying the sting of their failure on Highland Ridge. Others, like Park, had narrowed their eyes, unwilling to accept that the base's old-school dog trainer was suddenly elevated above them. Now here she was, exposed, no more hiding in the kennels, no more silence as shield. Her methods were no longer her secret, they were curriculum. She began quietly. Technology fails, terrain blinds it, weather defeats it, but your dog's knows it doesn't fail, it doesn't quit, if you know how to listen. Some handlers shifted, skeptical. One raised a hand. With respect, Sergeant, we've been trained on scent basics. What you're talking about sounds primitive. Maya locked eyes with him. Primitive. Her tone cut like steel. Tell that to Specialist Jackson, who's alive because a dog's nose found him where your drone couldn't. The silence that followed was sharp. She continued. Your equipment is powerful, but it's a crutch if you don't understand the land. Shadow tracking is about reading the world the way your dog does. Wind, soil, vegetation, animal trails, water patterns, they all speak. Your dog hears them. Do you? Phantom rose as if on cue. Maya gestured, sending him forward. He lowered his head, sniffing the gravel, then veered toward the tree line with sudden precision. Within minutes, he sat firmly by a planted item, a soldier's glove buried beneath brush. The handlers exchanged uneasy glances. They had scanned that area earlier with handheld thermal sensors. Nothing had shown. Phantom had found it in minutes. Stepped forward, his voice humble. How did he know? Maya crouched beside Phantom, running a hand over his fur. He read the disturbance. Soil turned softer where the glove was buried. Air currents carried the faintest shift in scent. To you, it was invisible. To him, it was a beacon. And if you trusted your dog instead of your screen, you might have seen it too. Park crossed his arms, frowning. With respect, ma'am, that sounds like instinct, not science. Maya stood, her eyes locking on his. Instinct is science written in muscle and bone. You just don't trust it because you can't download it. The words hung in the air. For weeks, the program unfolded with tension. Some handlers leaned in, hungry to learn. Others dragged their feet, clinging to their gadgets like lifelines. Maya pushed them harder than they expected. Long treks in rain-soaked forests, night searches with no lights, exercises where only silence and a dog's ears could guide them. And always, Phantom led the way. The old shepherd became legend before their eyes. His muzzle was gray, his gait slower than it had been in his prime, but his precision left no doubt. Time after time, he located hidden items, rescued mock casualties, and followed trails technology couldn't map. Began keeping notes, sketching diagrams of wind flow and terrain shifts. He stopped laughing at Maya's whistles and instead practiced them late into the night. Park resisted longer, but even he couldn't deny the results. His drone failed in heavy wind. Phantom never did. But not everyone welcomed the shift. One evening, Maya overheard two younger handlers muttering outside the kennels. She's just riding her past. That old tattoo got her here. Doesn't mean she's better than us. Yeah, and Phantom, he's 10. How long before he drops in the field? What's she gonna do then, teach us fairy tales? Maya closed her eyes, leaning against the cool metal of Phantom's kennel gate. She had faced bullets, explosions, ambushes. But somehow the resentment, the jealousy, the doubt, cut deeper. Recognition hadn't freed her. It had chained her to expectations she wasn't sure she could meet. That night she sat with Phantom in the quiet. Her hand rested against the ink on her shoulder, the faded emblem of the trackers. We weren't supposed to be remembered, she whispered. And now they're making us into a program, into a legacy. What if it doesn't work? What if I fail them? Phantom shifted, laying his head on her lap, eyes heavy but steady. He had no doubts. His presence was enough. But Maya's doubts lingered. During a stormy night exercise a week later, those doubts came crashing. The handlers were spread across Highland Ridge again, this time in controlled drills. Rain pounded, wind howled, visibility collapsed. Exactly the kind of night where tech lost its grip. Maya led one team. Phantom at her side, close behind. Park commanded another group, his drone grounded by the storm, his patience wearing thin. The mission: locate a hidden casualty before hypothermia simulation expired. Time ticking. Minutes stretched, struggled to read the terrain, frustration building. I don't get it. Phantoms moving in circles. We're losing time. Maya watched the shepherd carefully. His circling wasn't random, it was deliberate, a tightening spiral. She recognized the pattern from years in Afghanistan. Phantom was bracketing, narrowing in on a scent too faint to follow straight. Trust him, Maya said. Hesitated. His instincts screamed to rely on the clock, the map, the systems he'd always trusted. But then he remembered Jackson, remembered Phantom pulling life from impossible ground. He clenched his jaw, nodded, and followed. 10 minutes later, Phantom sat firmly by a rock outcrop, pawing at the brush. Underneath lay the hidden mannequin, soaked, nearly invisible. Mission success. Exhaled, almost laughing. He did it, he really. But Park's voice crackled over the radio, sharp with failure. Negative contact. Negative, drone down, no trail, no find. Maya closed her eyes. One success, one failure. Proof that the divide was still alive. Later, back at the compound, Park confronted her. His frustration boiled over. This is a waste. We're soldiers, not storytellers. Technology scales. Instinct doesn't. Phantom won't live forever. What happens when he's gone? You're building a legacy on a dog who's running out of time. The words cut, not because they weren't true, but because Maya had whispered the same fear to herself in the dark. Phantom's years were numbered. His body tired faster now. Every step carried both strength and fragility. That night she knelt by Phantom's side in the kennel, her hand on his chest, feeling the steady rise and fall. "They're right," she whispered. "You won't always be here, and when you're gone, what's left? Just me, just scars and memories." Her throat tightened. For the first time in years, she let a tear fall. But Phantom, as always, offered no words, just presence, and maybe that was enough. Because sometimes legacy wasn't about living forever. Sometimes it was about passing on what mattered before the time ran out. And Maya was running out of time to decide whether to carry her burden alone or to let it live beyond her. What happens when the one thing you trust most begins to falter? The storm rolled in without warning. Highland Ridge again, the cursed terrain that had swallowed so many. Only this time it wasn't a training exercise. It was real. A transport convoy had lost contact during the night. 4 soldiers unaccounted for. Their last transmission cut off mid-sentence, the kind of silence that clawed at every heart on base. Drones grounded. GPS blocked. Thermal useless in the sheets of rain. Colonel Hawthorne stood in the command tent, his jaw tight. "We're out of time. If they're exposed out there, hypothermia will kill them before the enemy does. Sergeant, you're leading the search. Take Phantom. Take whoever you trust." The words landed heavy. Maya's chest tightened. Phantom's ears pricked as if he understood. But Maya saw it just for a moment, the stiffness in his gait as he rose. The years were catching him. The old shepherd's body didn't move the way it once had. And for the first time, doubt stabbed her. Could he do this again? Could she ask him to? But there was no time for hesitation. Soldiers' lives hung in the balance. She gathered in Park, their team stripped down to essentials. "No tech," Maya said firmly. "Not tonight. Follow Phantom. Follow me. Trust the signs." Nodded without question. Park hesitated, but even he knew drones and screens were useless in the storm. He gave a curt nod. They deployed into the dark. Rain lashed the ridge, wind clawed at their faces. Mud sucked at boots, trees bent low, visibility no more than a few feet. The world had become noise and chaos. And in the middle of it all, Phantom lowered his nose to the ground and began to move. Maya matched his pace, whispering encouragement, her hand brushing his flank every few steps. His body trembled not from fear but from strain. Age weighed on him. The storm didn't care. Minutes bled into hours. Phantom's head lifted, sniffing the air. He veered suddenly left, deeper into the ridge. His tail stiffened, ears locked. Maya recognized the signs. He'd caught something. "Trail," she called over the storm. The handlers followed. But the ridge fought back. The trail twisted, splintered, washed out by rain. Phantom circled, bracketing, trying to regain it. His breathing grew harsher, his pace slower. Maya saw it, his body straining beyond its limit. "Easy," she whispered, kneeling, her hand pressing against his chest. His heart hammered under her palm. He licked her hand once, eyes burning with determination. He wasn't done. Not yet. Maya swallowed hard. "All right, work." Phantom surged forward again. An hour later's voice cracked over the radio. "Contact, we've got something." They rushed toward him. Under a fallen tree, half covered in mud, two soldiers lay huddled, alive but weak, their eyes wide with relief at the sight of rescuers. "Two accounted for," shouted. "Still missing two." Maya nodded. "Phantom search." The shepherd pressed on, nose dragging through mud, paws slipping on slick stone. He moved slower now, every step a battle, but he refused to stop. Maya's heart clenched with every stumble, every cough. She wanted to pull him back, to shield him, but the thought of two soldiers still out there pushed her forward. And then suddenly he froze, head up, nose cutting through wind like a compass. He pulled hard toward a narrow ravine. Maya followed. "He's got something." They scrambled down into the ravine, mud sliding beneath boots. Phantom lunged ahead, barking once, sharp, insistent. And there they were. The last two soldiers, wedged between rocks, shivering violently but alive. The relief was overwhelming. Medics rushed forward. Radios crackled with confirmation. 4 soldiers, all found, all alive. But Maya's eyes were on Phantom. The shepherd collapsed onto his side, chest heaving, mud caked into his fur. His body trembled violently from exhaustion. Maya dropped to her knees, hands on his chest, tears mixing with rain on her face. "You did it," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You brought them home." Phantom's tail flicked weakly against the mud. His eyes found hers, tired but steady. When the helicopters lifted the soldiers out, Maya stayed behind in the rain, cradling Phantom's head in her lap. Crouched beside her, soaked, his voice trembling. "Ma'am, if it weren't for him, they'd be dead. No doubt, he's the real hero tonight." Maya nodded, stroking Phantom's ear. "He always has been." They carried Phantom back to base, wrapped in a blanket, his breathing shallow but steady. The vet checked him, shook his head, then finally said, "He's alive, but he can't keep doing this, not at his age." Maya's chest tightened. She knew it was true. The storm had proven it. Phantom had given everything he had left. That night, sitting by his kennel, she whispered, "Maybe this was your last mission. Maybe it's time." Her voice cracked. "I don't know who I am without you in the field." Phantom rested his head against her knee, eyes soft, as if to say, "You'll know. You'll carry it on." Tears slid silently down her face. The next morning, Colonel Hawthorne addressed the base. His voice carried across the compound. 4 soldiers alive because one old shepherd refused to quit. This is what shadow tracking means. Not glory, not medals, but life pulled from the edge of death. He looked at Maya, his eyes heavy with understanding. "Sergeant, Phantom has earned his rest, but you are not done. His legacy now belongs to you. Teach them, all of them, before the next storm comes." The handlers stood silent, the weight of truth pressing down. Respect was no longer whispered. It was spoken in silence, in the way they looked at Maya, at Phantom, at each other. And Maya knew, a chapter had ended, another had begun. But in her heart, she wondered, could she carry it alone? When the partner who had been her anchor was slipping into memory, how do you say goodbye to the partner who made you whole? The kennels were quiet now. Too quiet. Phantom lay curled in his stall, his muzzle resting on his paws, eyes half closed with exhaustion that sleep alone couldn't fix. Every rise and fall of his chest felt like a question. How many more mornings would there be? Maya sat outside his kennel, her back against the cold bars, listening to his breathing. For years, she had trusted that rhythm more than her own heartbeat. On missions, in storms, in silence, it had been her anchor. Now it trembled, softer, weaker. The veterinarian's words echoed in her head. He's alive, but he can't keep doing this. Not at his age. Alive, but retired. The word felt like a death sentence. Not because Phantom was gone, but because the battlefield had been stripped from him. And from her. She ran a hand over the faded tattoo on her shoulder, her other hand pressed against the steel of his kennel, whispering words no one else could hear. We built something no one can erase, but what do I do without you beside me? Phantom shifted, his tail thumping once against the floor as if answering, you carry it. But carrying alone felt impossible. The next week, Colonel Hawthorne announced Phantom's formal retirement. The entire base gathered in the training yard. Soldiers who once mocked now stood silent, rows of uniforms damp with mist. Phantom walked slowly beside Maya, his gait stiff, but his head high, as though he knew the ceremony was his. Hawthorne's voice broke through the silence. This dog has saved more lives than any piece of technology we own. He has taught us that courage doesn't fade with age and loyalty doesn't break under weight. Today, we honor Phantom, not as a tool, not as property, but as a soldier. Applause swelled, not sharp but heavy, reverent. Phantom's ears twitched. He blinked slowly, his gray muzzle lifted as if acknowledging the honor. Maya's chest ached with pride and grief. When it was over, she led him back to his kennel, not as a warrior preparing for the next mission, but as a legend stepping into rest. That night, alone in her quarters, the grief hit. She dropped to the floor, her hands covering her face, sobs tearing through the silence she had built for years. For the first time since Afghanistan, she let herself break. The soldier, the trainer, the shadow tracker, all of it collapsed into raw human loss. Because Phantom wasn't just a dog. He was her history, her witness, her last tether to the unit that never existed. And now that chapter was closing. Days blurred, training continued. The Shadow Tracker program moved forward, but Maya's steps were slower, her voice softer. The handlers noticed, especially. One afternoon after drills, he approached quietly. "Ma'am, you don't have to do this alone. You gave us more than you know. Phantom gave us more. Let us carry some of it." Maya looked at him, searching his face. The arrogance that had once defined him was gone. In its place was humility and something deeper, belief. That evening she tested him. They went into the woods, no gear, no tech. Just in his Rex. The dog pulled forward eagerly, nose down, tracing invisible paths. Followed, hesitant but focused, whispering encouragement the way he'd heard Maya do. Hours later, Rex found a planted item, a glove under damp leaves. His face lit with something Maya hadn't seen before, trust. "Good boy," he whispered, kneeling to stroke Rex. "Good boy." Maya watched quietly. For the first time she saw it, the spark transferring. Phantom's legacy was moving, piece by piece, into the hands of the next generation. Still doubt gnawed. Weeks later, during a joint exercise, Park approached. His drone grounded by weather, he had no choice but to rely on his dog. And for the first time he did. He crouched low, reading the terrain the way Maya had taught, letting the dog lead instead of commanding the screen. When the casualty was found, his face carried something new. Respect not just for Maya, but for himself, for the bond he'd finally trusted. Word spread. The Shadow Tracker program wasn't just working, it was transforming the base. Young handlers who once mocked now competed for slots in Maya's classes. Phantom's name was spoken with reverence. His methods, her methods, were being etched into a new culture. But at night, when the compound fell quiet, Maya still returned to Phantom's kennel. She sat beside him, whispering memories, tears hidden in the shadows. "You're the reason they listen, the reason they believe. Without you, I'm just a soldier with old stories. With you, we're a legend." Phantom's eyes blinked slowly, his breathing steady. His time was shorter now, each day a gift. But he had already won. His legacy had already spread. And in that truth, Maya began to understand something she had resisted. Legacy isn't about never ending. It's about passing on before you're gone. The next morning, during a lecture, she told the handlers something she had never spoken aloud. Shadow tracking isn't about me. It isn't even about Phantom. It's about a way of seeing, of listening, of trusting. We weren't supposed to exist, but we did. And now it's yours, carry it, don't let it fade. The yard was silent, not mocking, not skeptical, silent with respect. And for the first time, Maya felt it, not just grief, not just burden, but hope. Phantom's days in the field were over, but his spirit had already outlived him. And Maya, the soldier who once hid her tattoo, now stood as a teacher whose silence had finally given way to a voice that mattered. But even as hope stirred, a shadow lingered, because Phantom's story was nearing its end. And when that moment came, would she be strong enough to face it? What do you do when the heartbeat you've trusted more than your own finally stops? Maya had known it was coming. Every soldier knows when a partner is nearing the end. Phantom had slowed, his muzzle white, his steps heavy, his once sharp eyes dimmer now. Still, he watched her with the same unbroken gaze. Still, when she whispered, "We work," his ears twitched as if remembering. But in the spring dawn, as the mist curled over Fort, Phantom did not rise when she opened the kennel. His chest rose, fell, and then no more. Maya sank to her knees. The silence in that moment was louder than gunfire, heavier than any battlefield. She pressed her forehead against his fur, tears sliding freely, unashamed. For years she had been the unbreakable one, the quiet one, the soldier who carried scars without complaint. But now she broke, completely. Around her, handlers gathered slowly, hats in hands, dogs held back. No one mocked. No one whispered. They simply stood, heads bowed, as the old shepherd was carried out, not as an animal but as a comrade. Colonel Hawthorne himself ordered the flag lowered. "This dog," he said, voice raw, "taught us what no machine ever could. He carried a legacy we nearly lost. Today we don't bury just a soldier, we honor a teacher." The handlers dug the grave on the edge of the training grounds, beneath the old oak where Phantom had once rested during drills. Maya placed his worn collar in the earth beside him. She whispered, "You'll always be with me, old man. Always." The dirt fell soft, each thud a final heartbeat, and with it something inside Maya shifted. Grief, yes, but also clarity. Phantom had done his part. Now it was hers. The weeks that followed were a blur of work. The Shadow Tracker program expanded beyond Fort. Requests poured in from other bases, from law enforcement agencies, from civilian rescue groups. Maya traveled, teaching handlers who had never worn a uniform, park rangers who searched mountains, firefighters who combed ruins. She saw Phantom's lessons ripple outward. A park ranger in Wyoming found lost hikers in a blizzard when GPS failed. A search and rescue team in California located survivors in a collapsed building where no drone could enter. Border Patrol officers reported breakthroughs in terrain where technology always lagged. Each story carried Phantom's spirit forward. Once the loudest skeptic, now stood as her strongest advocate. During a regional conference, he spoke plainly. "We used to laugh at these methods. We thought they were old, outdated, but they saved Specialist Jackson. They saved me from my own arrogance. And they've saved countless lives since. Sargent didn't just train us, she changed us." Even Park, quieter, more reluctant, became a believer. He admitted one night by the fire during a field exercise, "I used to think only machines scaled, but people scale too, if they're willing to listen." Maya listened, silent, proud, her heart heavy but steady. Phantom's name was spoken in every class. His story became part of the curriculum, not as a fairy tale, but as proof. One afternoon, months after his passing, Maya stood alone at his grave. The oak leaves whispered above, the compound alive in the distance with dogs barking, soldiers training. She touched the dirt gently, then the tattoo on her shoulder. The ink was still faded, but it no longer felt like a secret. It felt like a promise. A new handler passed by, a recruit barely 20. He stopped, saluted awkwardly, and said, "Ma'am, I never met Phantom, but I've heard the stories. He's the reason I wanted to be here." Maya's throat tightened. She nodded once, unable to speak. That evening she addressed a class of new trainees. Soldiers, civilians, officers, rangers, a mix of uniforms and jeans, all waiting, eyes fixed on her. She began softly. "You've heard the stories about Phantom, about the missions, about the unit that didn't exist. But understand this, it was never about medals or recognition. It was about one thing, bringing people home. That's the only measure that matters." Her gaze swept the group, her voice firm now. "Technology will keep evolving. It will save lives, but there will always be storms it can't see through, always shadows it can't reach. And when that happens, it won't be the machines that matter. It will be you, and your dog, and the trust you build together." The yard was silent, not the silence of skepticism, the silence of belief. Later, as the sun dipped, Maya lingered by Phantom's grave again. She whispered into the fading light, her voice breaking but steady. "You're gone, old man, but your work is. They carry it now. They'll keep carrying it, and that means you never really left." She stood there until night fell. The stars came out, bright and unblinking, the same ones she had walked under in Afghanistan years ago. For the first time in a long time, she felt at peace. Because some legacies aren't carved into stone or metals. They're carved into people, into the way they move, the way they listen, the way they save. Maya's story didn't end in shadow. It ended in light, in the voices of new handlers calling their dogs to work, in the lives rescued when the world thought hope was gone, in the silence where dignity didn't need to speak. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.